about it's not just our language that we have to teach our children, it's the stories and the culture. My name's Sarah Snake, and I'm a member of the Snake Clan of the Winnebago tribe. My Indian name is Hohamchikarenga, which means lightning woman. And I've lived here on the reservation for most of my life. I was born in Albert Lea, Minnesota, where my parents migrated to have a job, to work. They worked a lot in the fields and topping onions and things like that because, you know, neither of them had a very high education. Didn't go, I think my mom was a 6th grade, my dad was a 7th grade education. So they had to move away to, you know, to be able to obtain employment. And so we were all born in Albert Lea. And we moved back here in 1964. And I was 8 years old when we moved here to Winnebago. And I remember, you know, when we moved here, it was kind of a culture shock because Winnebago back then was totally different than it is now. And, you know, alcoholism was pretty evident, and the tribal members that lived here were poor and were mistreated, you know, and so moving here and coming here was kind of like a culture shock because we came from a different environment. It was pretty tough. You know, today, there's so much more positive things happening here on the reservation. A lot of people that come in and visit us say that they don't even know they're on a reservation. They wouldn't know that unless, you know, if they were just driving through. I have friends that say they drove through and the only way they know that it's a reservation is because it says you are now entering the Winnebago Indian Reservation. In other words, they said they would just think it as another community in the state of Nebraska. So my involvement here at St. Augustine's is I'm alumnus. I went to school here when we moved here back in 1964. This is where we came to school. At the time it was a boarding school, but we weren't boarders. We were two of the only families that were considered day students. We came to school during the day and got to go home every night to our parents. And the other ones were the Zach family. Mr. Zach and his wife were the caretakers here. They took care of, he was a maintenance man, and, you know, they took care of the facilities, and they had a lot of children, and their children were day students here too. It was tough. It was a tough situation, I remember, because we used to get picked on a lot, and I think a lot of that was because we got to go home every night, and the kids that boarded here didn't get to, and so they looked at us differently. And so we had to defend that a lot of times. You know, there were a lot of times I was threatened by the girls, the older girls, you know, that I was supposed to bring something to school. Like back then we used to eat whole lemons and, you know, soften them up with the lemon juice and then pour Lickamade. I don't know if you know what Lickamade is, but it's a form of Kool-Aid with sugar added in it. And we would put that in the lemon and then, you know, eat just the raw lemon like that. But the girls used to make me bring them things to school. Other words, I'd get beat up if I didn't. So because I had access to, you know, to a family life and stuff, I think it was really tough for some of the girls to, you know, to be accepting of that. So we had a tough time. You know, we had a tough time. And way back when St. Augustine's was, when it was a boarding school, we didn't have the facilities we have now. Like this church we're in right now wasn't here. There was a little tiny church up on the hill. And there wasn't a school like we have now. There was a big Quonset half tin can, we used to call it that. We went to school, and I always remember it was real cold. And when we moved to Winnebago back in 1964, there wasn't really a lot of housing for people to live in. So I remember we used to just live in whatever we could. And I remember living in most of the places we lived, we had to burn wood because it wasn't, you know, natural gas heating in the houses we lived in. We had to haul water because there wasn't, you know, plumbing. We had to use the outhouse and take, you know, baths and a big tub in the living room. And And so I remember it was different. And so when growing up in Albert Lea, we would, I'm sorry, my earring fell off.
That's okay.
When we grew up in Albert Lea, even though we were poor, I didn't know we were poor, but we had running water, we had electricity, and so it was different coming here and not having those luxuries. And so, but I remember coming to St. Augustine's, and when we would come, back then I would say the principal at the time, her name was Sister Ignatia. And Sister Ignatia would always, the Quonset was real short, real small. You could hear when somebody came in the door, and I always remember that she would say, "Oh, the LaPointe kids are here," and I often wondered, you could always see her in the office say, "Oh, the LaPointe kids are here," and I'm like, how does she know that? She's in her office, inside a room where she can't see anybody coming in, but then she could hear the door open and shut, but she'd always say, "Oh, the LaPointe kids are here," and I'm like, how does she know? And so years later, as an adult, I asked her one time, I said, "Sister Ignatia," I said, "why did you always know when we got to school?" And she said, "Because I could always smell popcorn." And I'm like, popcorn? So then when I thought about it, my dad would, from the local farmer, after the farmer would get his popcorn fill picked, and he had all these empty cobs that didn't have the corn on anymore, my dad would go get it, and we'd use it to burn in the stove and for heat. And so because of that, we never noticed it because it was just common for us. And so apparently we smell like the popcorn and so that's how she knew that the LaPointe kids were at school. And I remember going to school here, and then when I had to transition down to the public school, it was hard. It was hard to transition because the culture down there was totally different than it was up here. And we didn't really know a lot of the kids from the public school because we came up here every day. And then our evenings were spent, like we had to go to study hall after school with the kids, and we had to more or less be like the kids up until the time where it was supper, and we would go to benediction and all this kind of stuff after school. And that was a part of being in the day program. We had to participate in those, and then we got to go home with our family afterwards. And I just remember, all the fun things that we did. Well, when we lived in Albert Lea, I went to parochial school too, because I always remember going to St. Theodore's and in Albert Lea, Minnesota. And I remember, I always remember, I was thinking there was some questions. They said, what do you remember about, your childhood or whatever? And I was thinking, I always remember the day when JFK got killed. I don't even know when he got assassinated. I don't even know what grade I was in. I think maybe I was in first or second grade. And I remember that day, and the sisters came into the classroom and told us our president was assassinated. And I remember everybody cried. We were just little kids, but we cried about it because we were so proud of him, and I think back about it now and the things I've learned as an adult about John F. Kennedy, it's like, wow, we really lost a good president at that time. And so I remember that, but I think my earliest recollection of a child when I was 2 years old. And my mom often asked me, "How do you remember that?" And I said, "I don't know." And I don't know why I remember, but I remember I told her, I said, I remember when we went into this big building, and I said, there was great big heavy doors, and they made a whole bunch of loud noises. And we went into that building, and seemed like there was all kinds of nothing but men around. And then I remember my dad was holding me, and he was kissing me on the cheeks, and she said, "How can you remember that?" And I said, "I don't know, but that's what I remember." And then I remember there were all kinds of other men standing in this room, and Dad saying, "This is my little girl." And so, my mom's like, "I don't see how you can remember that." So when I asked, where were we, she said, "Your dad was doing time in the Nebraska State Penitentiary for motor vehicle homicide." And she said, and I used to take you down, you were the baby girl then, and I used to take you kids down to visit him. And he served an 18-month sentence. And so she said, I don't know how you can remember that. And I said, well, that's what I remember, these big doors. And she said, wow. So, I have a pretty good memory yet, even though I'm going to be 62 years old. I have a very good memory of things. And I was always told by the nuns here that if I practiced or talked my language, that I was going to go straight to hell. And the picture that the nuns painted of hell was somewhere where I didn't want to go. So I always remember not wanting to go to hell, so I couldn't dance at the powwow, or I couldn't do this or do that, because if I did, I was going to go to hell, because that's what the sisters used to tell us. And so I was always scared, and at one point I was even ashamed to be dark-skinned and be an Indian, because that's how I was made to feel. And so it took quite a few years, and then going to school here, and just the teachings that the Catholic Church taught me about Christianity and the Ten Commandments, and all the different things of the church, and going to catechism, and that's how I tried to live my life. And I remember when I was a junior in high school, I even thought I wanted to become a nun. And then the American Indian movement, my dad was a strong believer in the American Indian movement. And so I got a taste of that, and my dad talked to me. So then it brought pride back into me about who I was and what I was and where I came from. And I got a little militant there for a while, and I quit coming to church, and I quit being a Christian. I didn't want to be a Christian anymore. And I still struggle with those things. There's time to time, where I struggle with the teachings of the Catholic Church. And I think even doesn't matter what race you are, people struggle with teachings of the Catholic Church. And so it was really hard for me, but I got very involved in the American Indian movement. And I remember, I believe I was 14 years old, and when they took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Washington, D.C., and my dad had already went. My dad had already went to Washington, D.C., so I always remember it was Halloween Day, October 31st, and I went home and I told my mom, I'm going to Washington, D.C. Dad said I could go if I could find a ride, and I found a ride. And nothing my mom said was going to change my mind, because my dad told me I could go if I could find a ride. Well, it just so happened that this lady from the community, her name was Betty Scott, her and her daughter were going to go. And so I asked if I could go with them, and she said, yeah, if it's okay. And I said, well, my dad already told me I could go. So I remember going home, and it wasn't even, asking my mom if it was going. It was telling my mom I was going. That's how radical and militant I got. Nobody's going to stop me from anything. So I remember I went to Washington, D.C., and when they took over the BIA office, I was like 14 years old. And I think back now about with my granddaughter, my granddaughter just turned 15, and there's no way I would I would let her tell my daughter-in-law or my son that she's going to go, and I don't care what you think, So, I think about the gray hairs it gave my mom in that time in my life, but I was, bound and determined, because I had found that pride again about being a Native American woman. Because for so long I was ashamed, gee, why can't I have blonde hair? Why can't my skin be white? Why can't I have blue eyes? Why do I have to be like this? So it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And so now, where I'm at in my life, I got 3 sons. I'm divorced. John and I, we got married here in the Catholic Church, and we did our 6 month or however long marriage prep, and had a big wedding, and had 3 kids immediately after, and things didn't work out, and we got divorced after 24 years. And so trying to still teach my children that, once you make that commitment, you should keep that commitment. I don't encourage them that they have to get married in the Catholic Church, because sometimes it's such a struggle. So, just as long as they make that commitment to the Creator, that, they're going to be faithful to this person that they're with. So it's really hard to expect them to put their teeth into that when my marriage failed. But it's like, well, that's the way it was. That's the way it happened, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, but I just found out last night that I'm going to be having my 10th grandchild. So, I got two new grandchildren on the way, and I never thought that with having 3 boys that I was going to get to enjoy that many grandchildren. But, and only having 3 kids, because, my mom can explain to you, I think she keeps account of how many kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids she has. My mom has also been my inspiration. There's times where, she tells me that I need to learn how to say no when I'm asked to do things. And I told her, well, I lived in this house with this woman that didn't know how to say no. And that's what she taught me, is that if you can help out, you can volunteer, you can do this or do that. To this day, she's 86, soon to be 87, and she still can't say no. So, she's been my inspiration, and there's nothing bad about any of that. She always tells me, you need to slow down. And I say, well, when you slow down, I'll slow down. So, to this day, she's still watching grandkids and great-grandkids on a daily basis. And whenever anybody wants fry bread or homemade buns made or banana bread, okay, I can do it. She'd be making bread every day if somebody asked her almost every day. I remember one week last year, every day of the week, she was making bread for somebody. And so it's like, well, when you slow down, I'll slow down. So we have a running joke with each other about that. Well, I lived with a woman for so many years that taught me, not to say no. So, so with that, I went down to the public school in my 7th grade year. I didn't finish 8th grade here because it was it was tough. I was getting picked on every day from the girls here. And it just got tougher every time. And so I asked my parents if I could please move to the public school for my 8th grade year, because I was tired of fighting. Well, I went down there and I had to fight too, so and defend myself, take up for myself. And I always told my dad used to say that, don't go looking for trouble, but if trouble comes to you, then you take up for yourself. And so it was a struggle, because we weren't accepted by the kids here at St. Augustine's because we were day students, and we weren't accepted down at the public school because we didn't live here. We weren't, born here and start here at a young age. So the people had to get to know us. Even to this day, we struggle because our ambitions and our leadership skills are totally different. And so, there's still people that families we struggle with and accepting us after all these years. But we just keep moving forward and just keep doing what, God meant us to do, so.
You work with young people here?
Yeah, I took a year off, but I started again last week. But I was motivated by a young man to start a youth group by the struggles he was going through. And I was the tribal court administrator here on the tribe. And this young man was a repeat offender that kept coming into the court system with, had like 13 files as a young man, 7th grader in high school. So he was really struggling. And he came to court one day and he asked the bailiff if he could come in and talk to me. And so he came in to talk to me, and at that time he asked me if I could read something out of my little book. And I didn't really realize that he was paying attention to anything when he was coming through the court system. But he seen a little book on my desk, and it was the Living Faith book that had daily readings in it. And I used it for myself, you know, and would take it out every morning when I got to work and read it. And then I had another copy at home that I read on the weekends. But it seemed like every day, whatever it talked about in there had something to do with what was going to happen or something that happened the day before. So I read it to him. He asked if I could shut the door, and I said yeah, and I got up and shut the door because he was all shackled. And they had brought him from the Woodbury Juvenile Detention Center, and so I read him the book, and it just so happened that reading that day was about choices that we make in life, you know, and there's always consequences for negative and positive choices we made. So I read that to him, and then he cried and he gave me a hug, and then he asked if he could come again and I could read him the book. And I said, well, I'll make you a deal, as long as it's not in shackles, and as long as it's not you being transported from a juvenile detention center somewhere, you're welcome to come here anytime, and I'll share these readings with you. So it was because of that I thought, you know, our kids really don't have any kind of spiritual outlet here. We don't have a youth ministry, we don't have a youth group around, you know, so I took it upon myself to start, you know, asking high school kids to come and spend a Wednesday night, and then eventually ended up every Wednesday night, and was, you know, all volunteer. You know, I've been doing this is my 22nd year, and it's all volunteer. And in fact, on my way in here, I had one of the teachers stop me and ask me about when is your next youth group, because the kids that went with you last Wednesday are excited for the next one. And I said, well, it won't be till November 29th, because I kind of got burnt out after doing it for so long. And then I think to myself, there's got to be somebody younger, you know, with new innovative ideas to do this, you know. And but I'll do it, you know, I'll do it for as long as they'll listen. But I've been told that because I teach them cultural teachings in there too. It's not just you know, our youth Bible study that night, but I teach them about, you know, our women, about our young girls, about what it is to be a young Winnebago woman, and our men about, well, men don't do that, or you shouldn't be doing that because that's not right. And, you know, so trying to teach them some, you know, some cultural things too, you know. And I talked to them about, you know, things my grandma told me, you know, as a Winnebago man, this is what you should be doing, you know, or my uncle told me this, you know. So handing down stories and teachings, because that's really important, because we don't have a lot of people that do that anymore. And so, you know, I always remember my dad telling us, all of us kids, that once we lose our language, when we lose our culture, then we're no longer Winnebagos. And so he said, we can't let that happen. You know, we have to continue to learn what we can, our language, our stories, our culture, so that we can always be Winnebagos, because Winnebagos were proud people. And so, you know, try to teach that to them too. I'm also the varsity cheerleading coach, and I do the same thing with my cheerleaders. You know, teach them about young Winnebago women. This is how you conduct yourself. You know, you don't go out there acting all crazy and, you know, doing this and that. And, you know, a couple times I took some of our youth to the National Catholic Youth Conference, and they were like, wow, I can't believe these kids are acting like this. Because we've always been taught, when you in prayer, you're humble. You know, you're humble. And so to go to a National Youth Conference and see all the kids out there screaming and yelling and doing actions to songs, it kind of, you know, my kids weren't expecting that. They thought, you know, they're being disrespectful because they're not being humble in their prayer. And so it was a way to teach them that it's okay. You know, it's okay. We got to change with the times. We can't always live the way we always lived. And so, but traditionally here on the reservation, when we participate in our tribal things, then that's a time where you're humble in prayer. That when you got an elder standing up talking, or elders praying, you don't clap your hands or dance around or do anything. You listen to that prayer and you humble yourself. So I said, there's a time and a place, you know, and we have these two roads we have to walk down as Native American people. You know, we walk down with our culture, and then we have to walk down the white road. to fit into society. And those our kids deal with that every day, having to walk those two roads.
Have persisted with the Catholic tradition. Why?
I ask myself that a lot. Why? Why am I here when, my grandmother, my mom's mom, her name was Jeanette, was one of the first boarders of St. Augustine's Indian Mission back in 1908, 1909. My grandmother knew St. Catherine Drexel personally. She was one of the students that knew St. Catherine. And, she tells me some of the horror stories of the punishment that they received here back in the early 1900s. And it was like, when my grandmother died at 101 years old, she came to church up until the point she couldn't be brought to church anymore. She was bedridden. She prayed the rosary every day. She read the Bible, all that. And I thought, gee, all the torture they put her through, and she's still a Catholic. She still comes to Catholic. We had a large mass for her. And I'm sure that the things I learned going to school here, that I wasn't going to hell, she probably learned those things too. And she got punished a lot more for practicing her culture. As a Winnebago woman. So I'm just like, and she ended up being a devout Catholic. And, I often wondered why, and I often ask myself that, is it because I've been guilted into feeling that I have to belong to this church? That, is it the thing in my mind that I'm going to go to hell if I don't? Am I still carrying around those teachings in the back of my head? But, I still go to Sweat Lodge. I go to the Sweat Lodge, and, I've gone to Sundance, and because my father's family, mother came from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, so I'm not only Winnebago, I'm Lakota. And so I take those things of both my tribes and try to put them in my life. So there's days where I just think, I don't want to be a Catholic anymore. I'm going to go back to being Native American, and I don't know, maybe it's trying to please my mom, to make sure that, that my mom feels safe, and knowing that, that I continue to believe in the Catholic faith. I don't know why I stay Catholic, but with my youth ministry, I don't teach Catholic teachings. I teach about Christianity and about Jesus Christ and things, but it's not from the Catholic perspective. Kids that come to my youth group aren't Catholic. They're either Dutch Reform, or they're Native American Church, or some of them are traditional. So it's just more a spiritual outlet, a way for them to know it's all right to pray, and it's all right to ask for help when you need help. And so it's those types of thing, and I guess up until Kateri Tekakwitha was canonized as a saint, we never really felt ownership in the Catholic Church. It was always like forced on us. And so, I've had that question asked me, so why are you Catholic? If all these things happened in your history, why are you still Catholic? And honestly, I don't know why. I don't know if it's just that connection that I have with God, with our Creator, and that I know it's a good life. But, I always often ask myself that too. I thought, well, I could live a good life without coming to the Catholic Church, and so, in all honesty, at 61 years old, I have no idea why I choose to be Catholic.
I think it's a common human condition to have, some of those questions, and I mean, it's a never-ending question. But thank you. I appreciate your honesty.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned when we talked on the phone about the culture, and you took some of your kids to another place. You had people coming here to visit, and they're like, "Why can't we go someplace else to visit?"
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit about that culture that Well, what's your culture? Remember that?
Yeah. Well, with the kids, when we have groups come in from other churches, from other places like Columbus, Nebraska, or Omaha, or that come in, white kids that come in, and so I always made sure and tell the kids, introduce yourself, say your Indian name, say what clan you are, share a little bit about yourself. And so they would do that. And then one time one of the kids asked me, how come we always have to get up and talk and say our Indian name and what clan we're from? They don't even know. And I said, well, because we want them to know that we know who we are and where we came from. And so, they would say, well, how come we can't go somewhere? How come they always got to come here and look at us? Why can't we go look at them sometime? So I had a special friendship with the youth minister in Columbus, Nebraska, at one of the church, St. Isidore's there. And so we had planned a visit. And so I had taken my youth group there a couple times to Columbus, Nebraska, meet with their youth group. But it's always the same thing. I have my kids introduce themselves, what clan they belong to, their Indian name. And I said, because that's unique, that's unique about us. And, so, and there's always a lot of college groups that come in. And one time I had a college group over from Des Moines. I can't remember the name of the school that came here. And one of the young boys asked me to give him an Indian name, and I said, you don't just give people Indian names, there's a whole thing that goes on. Just because you feel like a wolf dancing around the fire doesn't mean that's a name you're going to get. And so it was like, so then it really made me wonder, how many of these kids know where they came from and what their culture is? So that question I start asking them, okay, how many of you here are German? And then the kids would raise their hand. How many of you are Irish? And so then I would ask them, what do you do? What do you do on when you go hunting for the first time? Nobody knew. What do you do on Christmas? And so finding out that a lot of our young people these days are Americans. They don't know. It's really surprising to ask a high school kid that says they're German, okay, what do you do when you become a young lady, or when you go on your first hunt, or they have no clue. What do you do? What's something your culture does, when you become of age, or and there's nothing. They don't know. What kind of traditional foods do you eat from your homeland, and this, and they don't know. They eat pizza, and they don't know. A majority of the kids nowadays, the young teenagers, have no clue about where they come from, or their homelands. And so that's one of the things I always tell our kids, that what makes us unique, because you guys know your culture. And if you don't, if I got young kids that come in and I ask them, well, what's your Indian name? And they don't know, then I challenge them. You go ask your grandma, or you go ask your mom, what's your name, your Indian name? What does it mean? Who gave it to you? And what's the story behind it? Because there's a story behind why you got that name. And so I usually challenge them. And so since I just started the youth group up again last week, when I have my youth group in November, that's one of the first things we'll do. Because last week we had a hay rack ride, went down to roast hot dogs and stuff, and so I will get that new start with these new 7th and 8th graders. And so and I will challenge them. And sometimes I've told them, well, if you don't have an Indian name, ask your parents why you don't have one, because you should have one. And if you don't, then they need to be trying to get you an Indian name. So I know that there's been several kids in my youth group that have been named because I challenged their parents, our grandparents, to do that, because we believe as Winnebago people that when our time comes, when we're called home, when the Creator calls us home, He needs to call us by our names. When my time comes, He's going to say, "Ho hum chikadanga, come home to me." He's not going to, not know because I don't have a name. So make sure you get your kid's name. Make sure they have that name, so He knows how to call you home. So I don't know if that answered your question or if it went off on a wild.
I hear a sense of pride.
Yeah. Yep. And so like my boys, you know, they all got named at early ages. I have a couple grandchildren that haven't been named yet, but, you know, just keep putting in their parents' ears that that's something that they need to get done soon, you know, because we never know. We don't want to take for granted that we're going to grow to be old, because some of our families don't grow to be old. You know, I lost my father, he was 55 years old, and he died from diabetes complications, which blinded him, and, you know, he had neuropathy throughout his body, and he was on dialysis 3 times a week, and, you know, to see him suffer like that, you know, he didn't know how long he was going to be here, you know, but when his time came, the Creator knew how to call him home because he had that name to be called home. And so, you know, that's one of the teachings I really try to teach the kids, is that this is what we need to do, you know. So I would still believe in those things strongly, you know.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to be here. My name is Viola LaPointe, and I'm from the Winnebago tribe. And my story from Sarah's, I was thinking, wow, she's had quite a life. Mine is pretty calm compared to that. She was militant with her father and going to fight for our people. And I was always there to try to pull them back, but no. They finally gave me a name. My husband gave me a name that I was an Apple Indian. And I said, an Apple Indian, what do you mean? He said, oh, you're red on the outside and white inside. Oh. Because I was so against it. I mean, I knew they were trying to help our people. Our people need help. But I always believed in Creator God taking care of us, no matter what. I came to school here when I was probably 8, and I was a boarder for a couple of years. My mother put me up here because her mother was getting old and she had to take care of her, so she kind of didn't have the time for me. So my older sister and I came up here. My older sister was 7 years older than I. And she came up here when she was just a little girl, and she couldn't even speak any English. But the sisters taught her. And what my mother told my daughter about the mission when she came here, it wasn't that bad when I came here. I remember getting my hair all shaved off once because I ran away with my older sister. So when we got back, they shaved our heads. And I remember one time I didn't know a math problem, and the nun took my head and just bounced it on the blackboard, but those were the only times I could think of. The other times were all I was taught. Today I'm happy that I was taught the things I was, and helping the smaller children that were there at school. And I was just a child myself. I was here a few years, and then my father left for Wisconsin. And he wanted to get us off the reservation. So he ended up coming after us, and we moved to, as we were going to Wisconsin, we stopped in Minnesota and were asked a few questions about, like, working out in the fields. Is that what we were there for? And no, we were just traveling through. We didn't know anything about field work or what they were doing. They used to use migrant workers coming in. And so we went to Wisconsin, and my father was talking to my mom about it and thought, well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's a good place to get started. So we ended up in Minnesota doing migrant work or working with them. And we ended up moving to Minnesota. It was Albert Lea, Minnesota. And my mother put us in a parochial school. We went to the Catholic schools, St. Theodore's in Albert Lea. And after I got, like I was 15, my father was 50 years old when I was born. There were 16 of us children. I was the youngest daughter, and I had a little brother. And we had lived in Minnesota for 25 years. So I was away from the reservation all that time, and I kind of forgot about all the things I hear. But we had to go through a lot there. And, you know, it's called names all the time, and they'd just, cars go by, young guys singing, "You old squaws, why don't you go back to the reservation?" You know, they knew we were Indian. And I was the first Indian to go to school there, and I went to St. Theodore's. My little brother stayed behind here because Monsignor Halsman started boys up here. We used to only have girls. He started boys up here, so my little brother stayed that 1 year here to go to boarding school, find out what it's like. But he wasn't too happy with it, so he ended up going back to Minnesota that following winter, and then went to school with me. And it was hard, but we survived. And I quit school when I was 15 and went to work in a poultry house with my mom. That's where she worked. She worked there. She worked at Chinese restaurant just to get us along, because we worked all summer. My father saved money and to get us through the winter. And those were cold winters up in Minnesota. Well, when I got 18, I ended up getting married to, I don't know what you would want to call him. Him and I used to play together when we were just little, living out here at the, what we call the Power Grounds. And we ended up getting married in the Catholic Church. And our children are all baptized when they were babies. So then when my oldest son went to kindergarten, first few days he come home, he was beat up. We asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Oh, those kids won't play with me, and they're calling me names." And I said, "Oh, well, tell me about it." And he said, "Well, when I try to play with them, they run away from me and say, 'There's a snake, there's a snake, get away.'" And well, he'd fight, I guess. Ended up, when he was going to go to the parochial school the next year, we talked to Father and told him what went on, and it would probably be hard for him. And he said, "Did you ever think of having your name changed?" And so we never did, but he explained to us that we could do that. And so my husband ended up taking his mother's name. Her name was LaPointe. She was from Rosebud. And so really, my children are all LaPointes. But when Sarah got divorced, she took her name back, Snake. And she said, "I was born a snake, I'm gonna die a snake." So that's... But I had 7 children. I had 1 stillborn. And they were all Catholics. Today, Sarah's the only one who goes to church. I have 3 other children living in, they won't come to church. So I don't bug them at all. My husband hardly ever went to church with me. It was me that took him every Sunday. No matter if we had to walk in the cold blizzard, we walked to church. And I think that's what's in her mind, because how we have to go Indian and the white person's way. My father belonged to the Native American church. My mother was a Catholic. So I was bounced back and forth with this all my life, being Catholic, Native American Church. Okay, my father lived to be 83, and before he passed, he said, I want you to go back to your own church where you were baptized when I'm gone, because that's where you were baptized, so you go there. So after he passed, I went to a few of the church services, and then I lived in what he told me. I came back to the church. I never left the church. I was always there. Today I'm still there. After my husband passed, I became an oblate of St. Benedict. So I celebrated my 25th year as a Benedictine oblate last year. And that's my life. I try to live it as I promised. I go to daily mass every day. And I think that's what, keeps me, what would you say, keeps me intact, so close to God. So today, that's what I have. I was baptized Catholic. I got married in the church. I was with my husband for 36 years. And I guess I wouldn't have it any other way. And and all what Sarah said, it's what I would say too on Native American and my belief, how I believe both ways. No one can take it from me.
No.
I had 7 children. I had 27 grandchildren. And I have 56 great-grandchildren and 13 great-great. And we're expecting like 6 more babies, and 1 is a great-great, and 5 are going to be greats.
Wow.
So I get to spend every day holding one of them. And that's my job today, my last job. Native Americans count as you're young, you're born, and you go to a teenager, you go to middle age, and you get to the top. Okay, they say you made it to the hill, the 4th hill. We go through 4. Everything Native American do, it's 4, like the 4 directions, And so I said that to him when I turned 80. I said, well, I'm on that last hill. I'm going to coast in now. And that's the job the good Lord gave me now, taking care of my great-grandchildren. And I get to sit and hold my great-greats. And I have 2 great-greats coming to school here at St. Augustine's. So that's like 6 generations up here so far, starting with my mother.
And Mom and I had the honors of going to Rome when St. Catherine Drexel was canonized, along with my 3 sons. And so, I think that, and when youth groups come here and I talk to visitors that come here to Winnebago, I said, one of the things is just to think and to digest is that you guys are walking on holy ground, actual holy ground that a Catholic saint walked on, because St. Catherine Drexel lived here amongst the Winnebago people and, started the mission here. And like I said, my own grandmother, my mom's mom, knew St. Catherine, and she said that St. Catherine gave her the task at one time of taking the bell around in the morning in the girls' dorm and ringing the bell and waking the big girls up, and so, to even, digest that my grandmother knew a saint, she actually knew and talked to a saint in the Catholic Church is like, wow, that's something. Not too many people can say that. So, yeah. So, and then we got the privilege of going to Rome, and the kids had private audience with the Pope, and we performed in his basilica and went to mass there, and it was awesome that we got to experience that together. And so often my mom and I and my children, we've seen a lot of places in the United States of America because of our relationship with the church and our devotion to Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. And we've just been all over and got to share a lot of things. And this past year we went to the conference, and it was kind of close. It was in Rapid City, so that was the first time my mom went back in a few years. And I'm hoping to take her to the conference next year in Tacoma, Washington. That's where it will be. So now, rather than pray for the canonization of Saint Kateri, we pray for her as our saint. And this past year, the Catholic Church is considering canonizing Nicholas Black Elk as a saint in a Catholic Church. And so we will start, hopefully praying for his canonization. And so, like I said, I don't know why we remain Catholic with all this, the history of what happened to our people. Our language was taken away from us, our culture. I remember in 1986, Pope John Paul was at the conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and at that time he said, he asked for forgiveness of the Catholic Church to the Native American people. And there's a lot of Native American people that hold resentments towards the church because of the things that happened in our history. But when Pope John Paul said that and said, to culturize our churches, to make our church services closer to who we are and our tribes, that made us feel a little bit of ownership. And, what made it even more feeling of ownership is when our own Kateri Tekakwitha was canonized. And my oldest son and his family went to that canonization mass. And Mom and I, we were first ones considered to go, but we decided we wanted to stay here and celebrate with the people here. And so we stayed here, and we organized a big celebration that Sunday when St. Kateri was canonized, and involved our children here at St. Augustine's, and so we missed out on that, but but we got to go when Mother Catherine was canonized, so that was good enough for us. Yeah, we stopped and visit a fountain. You throw a coin in there, and depending how it lands, it said we were coming back. I said, well, we were back in spirit and heart, so yeah. In 80, when I came back from Albert Lea, after I graduated from high school, I moved back to Albert Lea, Minnesota, and I lived there for a number of years, and I worked for the city in the library. And then I came back to Winnebago in 1980, and I've been here ever since. I just had to go back and prove something to myself, I guess. So when we came back, I got involved in the church at the time, and more involved. And at that time, it was the Altar Society. And I used to come to the Altar Society with you. And you guys were doing corn back then. Because Angela and Lizzie and all of them were still here doing corn.
There were only 5 of us that belonged to the Kateri Circle at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it had to have been back in the early 80s. But I remember as a young child, we would do corn with Grandma. So corn was always a part of our life. But with the Kateri Circle, we use it as a fundraiser. To be able to go to the conference, the church conference every year. And the church conference is Native American Catholics throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And we join once a year at a different region. Like I said, this past year was in Rapid City, South Dakota. Next year it's in Tacoma, Washington. And so, we raise the money a lot of it by selling the corn, producing the Indian corn. And we grow it here on St. Augustine's land by the Father's house, and Ho Chunk Farms has graciously helped us this last year, and There's a farm family here that belongs to the parish. Their last name is Mayberry, and they've been planting the corn for us for years. And then we harvest usually in August and harvest the corn, and there's a big process that has to go through with doing it traditionally. There's some people that have chosen to use have it picked by a corn picker, and gets husks, and then they cut the corn off with a machine and put it in dehydrators. Well, we go out, we pick it by hand when the sun comes up in the morning, and I think you got experience with that, and husk it. And we always tease and say, because our people aren't originally from Nebraska, the Winnebago people are originally from Wisconsin, but we just being displaced by the federal government 5 times, this is where we ended up. So I always say we ended up being really corn huskers, and so here in Nebraska. So then we husk the corn, and there's a process of cooking it where you don't cook it all the way through. You just kind of blanch it, and then rather than taking a knife and cutting it off the cob, you use a spoon. And my grandma once told me that they used to have these little shells that had ridges on them, and that they would use the shells to take the corn off because it got the hearts of the corn off. And she said, now we just use spoons. And so, but we push it off with a spoon and get the heart of it, because that's with the flavor. And then a lot of people talk about how that heart of that corn represents the people that have gone on, our ancestors that have gone on. And so it gives a flavor to the corn. And that was, could be dried and eaten all during the winter time. So that was a sense of survival for our Winnebago people, back in our history when we were starving to death, was that they always had that corn to eat during the winter months. And so, and we've been doing it now for, well, like I said, I came back in 80, and I know the Kateri Circle was doing it since then, because I helped do it. And so now I'm trying to teach younger kids how to do it. And so this past summer, when we harvested, we had some of the 7th graders from our public school academy that came up and helped learn the process. And so they're needing to raise money because they take the kids to trips to Chicago or to Washington, D.C. to experience something off the reservation. And so they have to pay for that themselves. And so after they came this year, we worked it out where the tribe has given them some land to use. The Ho-Chunk Farm is going to plant Indian corn for them, and they're going to process their own corn next year and use it as a fundraiser. And Ho-Chunk Distribution Company has already agreed to buy from them all the corn they process. So if they process 150 quarts, Ho-Chunk Distribution will buy that corn from them.
You make soup out of it?
Yeah.
What's the
That's all we
Winnebago
make,
word?
soup out of it.
What's the Winnebago word for what that's called?
Washku, when you take it off the cob. Yeah, washku.
How's the soup? How do you make the soup?
Well, we dry that corn, so like lately we've been sticking them in the freezer, and then the night before we're going to cook it, we soak it all night, and the next day wash it good to get those little hulls off, and just put it on, and when it starts boiling, let it boil a while, and then put our meat in there. And then the little modern thing we ended up doing was sticking beef base in there. So, yeah, it's really good.
So, I mean, it's like it's kind of like a bean soup, only corn.
Mm-hmm.
It's soft.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a
we can't even tell you the flavor. You'd have to have some.
Oh.
It has a real distinct flavor.
It-
Some people like it, or most people like it, but there's some
Yeah.
people that don't care for the taste of it, because it does have a very distinct taste. It's not like making a pot of golden yellow corn,
Sweet corn.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's nothing
I
like
never
that.
got to try it.
Interesting. I'm very curious. For me, please.
I said I'm very thankful for having St. Augustine School here, because just like my little ones, even my little 2-year-olds, before they're going to eat their lunch, I try to remember to say a little prayer for them. So they got their little prayer they say, and they get up here and they learn more about religion, and it helps. It's going to help them. It helped me in my life. Because what they learn when they're little, that's something they don't forget either, when like 3 or 4 year olds. And I can't think of. I know one time I was with Father Dick Whiting. I adopted him as a son, and we were going to his father and mother's home. He was going to show me where they were buried, and it was just an outing. I always was going traveling with him somewhere. And I remember him stopping at a station. He said, "I'm going in to buy a lottery ticket." I said, "Really? Well, what do you want money for?" And he said, "Well, I'd add a couple rooms onto the school so we'd have more room." And I always remember that. So one time, one of my girls was telling me how big the lottery was, and I said, "Could you buy me a ticket? Maybe I'll win, and I can build a new school with a new one instead of adding a room or two on it." But I didn't win. So we're just supposed to stay the way we are.
Yeah, and I sometimes, which I sit on the board here at St. Augustine's. I have since we started the board. I'm a lifelong member, I guess, is what they made me. That was one of the things when Father Dave Korth was here, we talked about, was it would be so nice to continue that and have a high school here. But, financially, it's not even anything we could dream of right now. And so when our kids leave here from the 8th grade, they go to the public school. And so that's why I do my youth ministry too, so that the kids that leave here have an outlet. Because all of my nephews and nieces and my own kids, my granddaughter, all have come to youth group here. And like I said, I don't necessarily teach Catholic teachings because I don't want anybody not to send their kids here because of it. But, teach them about, values and the good values and good morals that we should have. And, and I have my sons that went to school here, and now my grandchildren are going to school here. And I have one granddaughter, Anna, my oldest granddaughter, that was accepted down at Duchesne Academy in Omaha, college prep. And she loves it, and she's been doing terrific as a sophomore, and I'm very, very proud of her. And I think that if we had a high school here, she could be going to school here in high school. But that's something she chose that she wanted to do, was to go to Duchesne Academy. And she had to. There was a lot of hard work she had to do to even qualify to get into it. So her parents are very, very supportive of her, and her other grandmother, are very supportive of her. And so it's hard. I mean, it's really hard for me because I have people in the community that say that, how can you still be a Catholic when you went through all the things and your family went through all the things they went through? And, to this day, like I said, it's probably the only thing I can think of is it's the relationship I made with our Creator. And that was through the Catholic Church that I did that. And so maybe that's why I can't just say, okay, I don't want to be a Catholic anymore. I often think that, and I have discussions with my mom about that, is why do I feel this way? But I always end up coming back, And recently just, I quit coming for a couple months, and then came back this past Easter, felt called to come back again because there was hardships with hard feelings here with things that happened here at St. Augustine's. And, it was real hard for me, but I came back again, started up my youth ministry again, so.
Well, you kind of went through that when they were having that up in the Dakotas.
Yeah.
You didn't come at all to church.
Yeah, no dapple. With the no dapple, that was really hard, as Christian people, they've come here and they taught us how to be Christian. We're supposed to love each other and do this, and then that goes on. It's even like, how do you explain that to your kids? All that hate that we face every day, I don't even like to watch the news. This morning I watched the news and seen some of the things that happened in the last couple of days, and I'm like, why does it have to be like that? And then here we are, teaching our kids, wanting our kids to be Christian and wanting them to believe in Jesus Christ, and then have things like that happen to them, or go through this thing with in our tribes, especially the Lakota people. They have this story that was told hundreds of years ago about the black snake that's going to come and poison us and kill us. And that's something that was handed down through history. It had nothing to do with just because they put the Dakota Access Pipeline in. That's a part of our beliefs in this story they told about how we will be destroyed by the black snake, and then to have the last name Snake, it's there's just things like that that are unexplainable, or you don't understand it at the time, but I believe that there's a reason that things happen in our day-to-day life, and we just got to be accepting of it, and that God isn't going to give us more than we can handle, and sometimes that's unbelievable. How much more can I handle? But we get by. And so, I guess I did when that was all going on up in Standing Rock. It was real hard for me to accept it, because I thought, what is this? What is this going on? When our people are being, attack dogs are being let go on them, and they're being shot with, water cannons and everything else, and people are losing their lives and nothing's being done. It's all okay to do this. It's just like a part of the history again, happening all over again. So there's times even now.
We're always taught forgiveness, though. And my father used to say, we all worship the same God. All of us, each and every one of us. There's only one God. We all worship him. Why is things happening like they are, But there's a reason for it. My dad used to say there's a reason for it. You don't see it today, but down the line you're going to see. And what they told us, it's happening.